This is episode number 362 of the InnerFight podcast with Matt James. Welcome back to another edition of the InnerFight podcast, folks. Thanks for joining us. No matter where you are in the world, we appreciate that you've tuned in. Massive shout out to our show sponsors, Smith Street Paleo. This week, we're going to hear from Matt James from Jack Gymnastics. Matt James, welcome to the InnerFight podcast. Or as we were saying before we started there, Jack Gymnastics.
Matt Gymnastics.
We'll just call you Matt.
It was a mistake to begin with, and now it's just an ongoing joke that everybody calls me Jack. So that's okay. Yeah.
Mate, give us a little bit of background. Who are you? What's Jack Gymnastics? And what do you do? I think that's the best place to kick it off.
Yeah. So my name is Matt James. So growing up, I was a national level gymnast.
Right.
So I was in the... Am I close enough? Yeah. I was
good.
In the
we can hear you.
Great British Junior National Squad for several years.
Yeah.
So I competed in like a number of national and international competitions growing up. I stopped doing that, and I moved to table tennis, played professionally for a couple of years.
Yes, he did. As we just found
How old were you when you stopped gymnastics?
I was 17, around 17, 18.
And how old are you now?
I'm 26 now.
Okay.
Yeah. So I stopped quite young. I probably should have carried on for a bit longer and kind of seen where it went.
I think for most people, when you say it like that, I don't think that's stopping quite young. Like, nowadays, people stop doing their sports when they're like 12 or 15.
Yeah, well, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah. I think
it's a bit of a mess. How did you get into it, though, mate? Like, what age were you when you started gymnastics then?
I was 5 or 6.
Wow.
I can't remember exactly. It's kind of a weird story. It's not really
Go on
that
then,
funny or
let's
anything,
have
but
it.
it's just a bit strange. So I hurt my finger.
Right.
I think I broke my finger or something, and my mum took me to get it checked.
Yeah.
And they said to my mum that I had flexible fingers and that I would be good at gymnastics.
No way.
So I think they might have got that judgment a little bit wrong, because I don't think it helps you that much. But yeah, that was it. So I was doing other sports like swimming and diving.
Yeah.
And my mum was like, yeah, why not? It's a pretty good base for everything else. So
Really?
she put me into it, and that was that.
What are your first memories of gymnastics as a 5-year-old? What sort of stands out and still sticks with you to this day?
I mean, when I first started, I wasn't in the greatest of gyms, to be honest. So we didn't have great facilities. I think the thing that stands out the most was that we cried a lot. So, like, I'm not kidding either. They pushed us really hard, and like with all the flexibility and mobility stuff. I mean, you can push kids harder generally because they adapt better. But it was tough. Yeah.
And what was when you started, sort of, what was the objective of the coaches pushing you that hard? Were you in an organization, in a gym that they wanted to produce like top level athletes, or what was the background on it?
Yeah, I think it has something to do with that. It's one of those sports that you don't really... I mean, no one really starts doing gymnastics for fun, right? It's something you generally start at a younger age. I mean, it's changing a bit now with CrossFit and the gymnastic element to there, but it's something you generally start with quite young, and the goal is really to kind of progress and get up to a good level.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to do with that. I think the other reason is discipline, right? Just like teaching the discipline from a young age, right? Because that sticks as you grow up. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
And how would training look like for 5-year-old gymnasts?
Yeah, that's what I was going to come to.
Like, I know, when kids play soccer, they have a ball and they run around and play. But for gymnasts, how's the training structures? Do you start with like, at a young age, we need to build like, your mobility, or we need to build like that base foundation, or are you just thrown up in the rings? And
a bit of both. So we do a lot of conditioning and work a lot on the basics. Right?
And conditioning, like when we think conditioning, we think running and rowing and burpees.
Not that conditioning. Yeah,
okay.
We used to call it conditioning, but it's like gymnastic strength training, effectively.
Okay.
So we'd work a lot on that, and just a lot of time on the basics, right? Like handstands, presses to handstands. We do rope climbs, like muscle ups, those kind of things, just to build that base.
Okay.
I mean, it's a bit different to if you were going to take an adult now and put them into gymnastics, right? And we can come onto it, but that's kind of part of the problem with... Not the problem, but the challenge with CrossFit is that people don't have that base. Their connective tissue isn't strong. They're trying to move their body weight, but they're not built for it.
Why is it different? Don't you just have to start as if you're 5 years old?
Yeah, you do to a certain extent, but you're lighter, so everything's a bit relative. Your connective tissue is generally a bit stronger, and it adapts faster relative to your weight.
So the volume needs to be...
To the volume, exactly. Yeah. And because you're starting from scratch and building up the bases, just over time it will naturally happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So just building that basic strength? Like when you say connective tissue, can you explain like what's the difference between connective tissue and the muscle tissue, and why is it important to build both?
Yeah. So when we talk about connective tissue, I mean it's kind of a range of a few different things, but we're mostly talking about tendons and ligaments, effectively. So just like building that strength through the joint, so that you can actually put force through the joint safely.
And how's that done?
So I think like the one way to do it is eccentrics.
Yeah.
Right? So you just jump up to the top of pull-up and just go down as slow as you can, as an example. Yeah. So just that lowering phase to build that strength. The other way, and the way that I use a lot, is isometric holds.
Yeah.
Right, and particularly straight arm work. Right, so if you do anything straight arm, if you try and do like a planche progression or something, you're not experienced it before, you'll really feel the pressure building up in your elbow.
Yeah.
Right, it's just that strength and conditioning the joint, effectively. I think the reason that people fall into problems is because connective tissue just takes so much longer to adapt than muscular tissue does.
Yeah.
Right, just as simple as that. There's limited blood flow to connective tissue, so the adaptation process takes much longer.
And so that's the healing process if you break it, yeah?
Exactly, yeah. And it's also a bit of a double-edged sword in a way, right? Because it also means you can't hammer it as hard, right? It's got to be more progressive.
Okay.
To just like build up gradually to build that strength in the connective tissue.
Right. So in gymnastics, when we talk about connective tissue and we talk about muscle tissue and we talk about the development of the different things, you mentioned different progressions or levels that you have to go through to be able to add more volume or more advanced movements. You and me, we already spoke about the three kind of different levels of, or how different areas where you can progress gymnastics.
The methods of progression.
Yeah. Try to talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, so this is specific to everything in gymnastics. It's a bit more specific to strength training.
Yeah.
Right. So when you take a dynamic movement like a kipping movement, you then start bringing in coordination, spatial awareness, all these different things. But fundamentally, there's three areas. So first is mechanical advantage. Right. So if you think of your body as a lever, right, you can shorten or lengthen that lever by changing your body shape, so to speak.
Yeah.
So if you stand up straight, your lever is at its longest. If you go in a straddle, you start to shorten that lever.
And that means putting your legs out to the side.
Putting your legs out to the side. Yeah. If you then tuck your knees up, you then shorten that lever even more.
Yeah.
And all that's doing is just shifting your center of mass. Right. So the longer that your lever, effectively, the further your center of mass is from the place that you're exerting force.
Yeah.
Right. So let's take a simple example. Imagine you're in the top of a push-up position.
Mm.
Yeah. You're kind of exerting force at the shoulder joint. That's what's keeping you in place and stopping you from falling down to the floor.
Yeah. Right.
So your center of mass is quite far back. I don't know where exactly, but probably around your bum, like around that level. Yeah, like kind of around your core. By straddling your legs or tucking up, moving your knees closer in, you're just shifting your center of mass closer to that point where you're exerting force. Right, and because it's closer, you then effectively don't need to exert as much force, which is strength, effectively, because gravity is not putting you down as much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just about shifting the center of mass closer to the joint that's exerting the force to hold you in place or do the movement, whatever it is, to scale it or upscale it.
Yeah.
Basically.
So that's why we, for example, would scale a push-up to just be on the knees, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can basically do that with every single movement.
Yeah, fundamentally, especially with isometric holds and strict movements. Right, it's a bit more complicated with kipping movements because of the dynamic sense, but fundamentally, yeah.
And I guess it's sort of the same in weightlifting, like having a barbell overhead versus having it on your back.
Yeah,
it makes it a lot easier just having it on your back because it's close to that center of mass.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
Point number two.
Point number two. So resistance. Right. So obviously, we're not usually having external loads with gymnastics, right? It's not like weightlifting where you have the external load of a barbell, but you're still moving your body weight, right, which is effectively quite heavy. So you can just find ways of reducing or using more of your body weight through the movement, if that makes sense. Yeah, so as an example, you can do a strict muscle up on the rings. You can then put your feet on a box and do a strict muscle up.
Yeah.
Right, and because some of your weight is resting on that box, you don't have to lift as much of your body weight, so it's easier, effectively.
Yeah.
So that one's pretty straightforward. You just have to be a bit creative in finding different ways to do it for different movements.
I mean, CrossFit, they do start like putting extra weight on you, like with the weighted vest we've seen at this year's regionals and those kind of things. So it's kind of interesting to see how that will evolve with new objects.
Yeah, it's good. It'll be interesting for sure.
Do you think people in CrossFit in general are ready for external weights such as a weighted vest, even at the elite level?
Not really, to be honest.
In what sense?
I think the problem is this, like going back to, if we take the connective tissue as an example.
Yeah.
Right. Let's say you're doing butterfly pull-ups and your technique isn't great.
So we'll take the first event from regionals this year.
Yeah, as an example.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say like you're doing butterfly pull-ups and your technique isn't great. Right. So every time you come down to the hang position, you're kind of dropping a bit heavy.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to take its toll on your joints. Right. And then we add the element of external load, like the weighted vest. It just kind of makes it worse and worse and worse, more force putting you down. Right.
Yeah.
And like I don't know this for certain, and I'm not like an expert in physiology or anything like that, but I think that might have had something to do with the amount of pec tears at regionals.
Yeah,
if I'm honest.
Just because you hang there in the bottom and
exactly.
the whole thing just get lengthened and straightened out a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Right, that was the event before, and it's just opening and stretching here. Right, if you're moving a bit badly, you're a bit stiff in that position. It just kind of weakens there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, but that's...
So if you have a new member that just started CrossFitting, you do one strict pull-up, and they see some of the competitors just banging out butterfly pull-ups, would you let them learn butterfly pull-ups and start implementing, or is it just like a complete no-go?
No. I think you can start going through the progressions, right? So if we take a butterfly pull-up as an example, there's a certain level of spatial awareness and coordination that you need to have in place. Right, so even if you haven't got the strength yet, you can still start working through very basic drills just to practice the movement.
Yeah.
And like that coordination awareness is going to hand over to everything else anyway.
Yeah.
But you need that strength in place, right? And ultimately, you're only going to plateau anyway. Right.
Yeah.
If you take, I don't know, let's just take a simplistic example. Strength is kind of the base for muscular endurance for gymnastics, right? Like if you're doing something like cycling, right, it's different ends of the spectrum, right? So it's a bit different. With gymnastics, you're only going to do 30, 40, 50 reps unbroken. Right, so that's much closer to that 1 RM effectively.
Yeah.
Right, so if you take someone that can do, let's say you never train strict ring dips unweighted, right, but you just train like heavy, like 1, 2, 3, up to 5 RM weighted dips. Right, if you can do a 1 RM dip with 75 kilos around your waist, right, you're going to be able to do a lot of strict ring dips. And that's because you've got that base of strength first.
Yeah.
Right, so I think there's only, if you don't have that strength in the first place, there's only so far you're going to be able to get with the kind of endurance side of gymnastics anyway.
So what we say is the kind of the benchmarks for people to be able to move on to the next step. Let's just take they want to learn a muscle up, a ring muscle up. I think that's a big goal for most people. What are the standards before they even try to get up there, like winging it up, chicken winging it up, or like, do they need to be able to do 10 strict pull-ups or a backflip or whatever?
Oh, backflip.
Backflip. That's first.
It usually helps.
Double.
You could do... Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I think I usually say 5 and 5. Right, 5 strict pull-ups, 5 strict dips.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit... I would say more in an ideal situation, but it just... People don't want to wait that long. They're too impatient. Right, so I've kind of met in the middle a bit. And that's kind of safe enough. But I think for a kipping muscle up, the most important thing is more the stability. Right, so being able to hold the bottom of the dip position, as an example, like comfortably.
Yeah,
I think that's where most of the injuries happen with, say, a kipping pull-up. Right, if you're not comfortable and strong in that position, you haven't got good shoulder extension mobility to catch there. Right, and then you're kind of dynamically throwing yourself around a bit because the technique's usually not that great. Right, and then they kind of throw themselves into that position. That's when they start to fall through and things like that, right? So I think specific to a kipping muscle up, I would say stability in the bottom of the dip position is like one of the most important things I look for as a foundation to begin with.
You mentioned earlier that the people are not like patient enough to wait to be able to do more than 5 and 5. Why is that? Like in any of the sport, that if you want to run a marathon, you need to train for it, or hopefully in most cases. Why is it not in gymnastics?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I mean, like in artistic gymnastics, it is very much like that. No, everyone appreciates the process, right? Yeah. I think it's so much that people don't appreciate the process, but it's just the culture of CrossFit. I think, like the classes, you come in the class, there's a WOD with muscle ups, and like people just want to be able to do it. Yeah. They don't want to hang around and get it right to begin with. They just want to get it done, effectively.
And you think can you kind of say that some coaches, or it happens a bit around the world, that coaches tend to sell people like that a little bit of success feeling or short feeling of success, like by pushing somebody up in a ring muscle up, and then they're up and they're going to like, I almost did a ring muscle up today, but really they didn't, and they're not at all ready for it. Like, should coaches be really careful with like exposing members or in general clients to that feeling of success?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, the benefit is that they get that confidence.
Yeah.
Right? There's like, in the seminars, I often like support people through the reps.
Yeah.
Right? Just because it's important for them to, for a lot of people, it's not a strength issue. Right? They just don't have the coordination and awareness to be able to do it. Right? So by supporting them through the reps, they get a feel for it of what they need to do effectively in each position.
Yeah.
Right? So it's definitely worthwhile doing. I think like the biggest problem, to be honest, is that people just miss stages in the progression. Right? So what happens is they'll come in and learn a muscle up. Right? And let's say they learn 3 unbroken muscle ups. Right? Their technique probably isn't great. And then what do? They come into the class and then they start doing muscle ups in something like Amanda.
Yeah.
Right? And then they wonder why they're standing around failing reps and not getting the right stimulus for the workout.
Yeah.
It's because you're not ready to put muscle ups in the workout. Right? And that sounds obvious, but still no one really does it. Right? And that's kind of one of the things in the programming that I like to try and get people to do, is just to make that a bit more of a gradual process. You just build up, right, and think about the longer, like the bigger picture, basically.
Yeah.
So like you learn muscle ups, you get the technique right, and then before you start throwing in high intense metcons, right, just put it in with a simple like low eccentric monostructural movement like a row, right, or a bike.
Yeah.
And not even at a fast pace. So the heart rate's still, it's elevated, but it's not really high.
Like something like zone 2.
Exactly, yeah, like zone 2, zone 3 max. And then you can just focus on technique. Right, and then once you can keep your technique in that environment, in that scenario, then we can start increasing the intensity. Right, and then we can start including other like compound movements with eccentric loading.
Yeah.
Right, and I just see that as the process to build someone up to be able to doing a muscle up, to being competitive in that skill. Right, but I think people miss that middle stage completely.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree a lot. I mean, every time that... this is the funny thing, though. Like, within CrossFit, every time that or most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, that someone gets their first muscle up, it'll probably be, like, in a workout where it's gone... What was the one from the Open a few years ago? Wall balls, like, how many people, wall balls, double unders, muscle ups? How many people got their first muscle up in that stage under absolute smoked fatigue?
Yeah.
Like, there's a chance of you unable to do a muscle up, your double unders are probably not that good, and it's probably taken you about 7 or 8 minutes to do 150 wall balls, and then they get there and then like first muscle up and everyone's celebrating all the first muscle ups, but no one's talking about all the ripped shoulders that have come out from it.
Yeah.
From it.
Yeah, of course. And all that adrenaline. And,
When you found CrossFit and obviously saw the gymnastics side of it, and I mean, obviously we're talking about some of the dangerous things going on here, you must have just gone, holy shit, this is just weird, what's going on here? Like, you've done gymnastics for 12 years at a high level, and they're just bastardizing every single movement. Talk us through sort of that process and what it was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, so when I first kind of saw CrossFit and started doing it, I was kind of in that typical like gymnast bracket of, I kind of thought it was a bit ridiculous. And all like the kipping movements, I was like, that's not gymnastics and all this stuff. Yeah. But I kind of like, it grew on me a lot. Yeah. And like, I kind of like fell in love with CrossFit, and that's why I started doing this, right? I started doing CrossFit myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is the point as well. Like, I think people in CrossFit, we call it gymnastics.
Yeah.
Right. And it's good that you have a base in gymnastics. It hands over like tremendously well to CrossFit.
For sure.
Right. But if you look at the two as separate kind of entities, they're actually very different.
Yeah.
I like gymnastics. Like artistic gymnastics is very much anaerobic. Yeah. Whereas CrossFit is very much aerobic.
Right.
Artistic gymnastics is primarily straight arm movements. Right, there's actually not that much bent arm movements in gymnastics, whereas in CrossFit, pretty much everything's bent arm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, like in artistic gymnastics, like kind of that pure strength is much more important. If you take the rings just as an example, right, you're holding positions in where your muscles can't contract effectively, right, and that's why it's difficult.
Yes.
And I mean, in CrossFit, again, it's more endurance based, right? You're trying to do low skill movements for multiple reps over and over again, right? Yeah. So I think like it's important that, and I think it benefits to have that base in gymnastics, but you just need to know how to transfer it to CrossFit,
right?
I think that's where people get it wrong a bit as well. I think you've got a lot of gymnastics experts that don't understand CrossFit, and then you've got a lot of CrossFit experts that don't really understand gymnastics. I think it's the bridge between the two that people
talk us through your introduction and sort of progression in CrossFit. Then how did you come into it, and sort of how do you look at it different? Because I actually hear like your point of view is a lot different to a lot of other people as well, and a lot of the gymnastic-y people are just like, yeah, this is terrible, blah blah blah. But you've actually just explained it, like how different gymnastics is to what we're seeing in CrossFit, whereas normally they're like, yeah, you guys are doing gymnastics wrong, but actually
we're not doing
gymnastics.
CrossFit,
it's actually the first time I've ever heard anyone put it like that. Genius. So talk to us about your entry like into CrossFit, mate, and then what you saw and why you started Gymnastics.
So it's kind of a friend of a friend. So one of my
always is
one of my best friends played professional rugby, and the guy that owned the box played rugby as well.
Right.
So kind of met him and started doing CrossFit. And then, I mean, like from my personal perspective, I picked up the movements relatively quickly.
Right.
And I think that base in gymnastics helped with weightlifting and
coordination.
Things, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I didn't have a strong lower body or anything like that, right? But
is that because you'd maintained good movement around joints despite being like, because I mean, like Andre says, like 12 years old, 15 years old, people stop playing sport, or maximum 18 years old, and then we go into this position, but you sort of maintained that good position. Is that what helped you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it's like, don't get me wrong, when you stop, it goes away pretty quick.
Right.
But then equally, it starts to come back fast as well.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I think that's definitely what helped. Yeah.
Right.
I think people, like you said, people stop doing sports at a young age, and then they come and sit around a desk and sit on like this all the time.
Yeah.
Like their shoulders are protracted, and that kind of just creates problems in itself. So,
what we say like defines a gymnast. Like when a gymnast enters CrossFit, what can you say is great about gymnasts? Like obviously strong core, mobility, or
I think like mobility, upper body strength,
chicken legs,
chicken legs, weak lower bodies. I think. For me, I think like the coordination and the spatial awareness is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think, so if I look at when I was doing gymnastics, we never did kipping movements. Or when I came into CrossFit, I didn't know what a butterfly pull-up was. Right. You don't do kipping ring muscle-ups in gymnastics or anything like that. Right. So, but I was able to obviously, like, I could kind of do it from the beginning and pick it up very fast, and I was able to get to a point like relatively fast without really training it to be able to do quite a lot of unbroken muscle-ups.
How many can you do?
I can do 50 on the bar.
50 unbroken bar muscle-ups.
Yeah.
Where do we sign up?
Strict?
That's a good question. No, not strict.
Then I don't want to sign up.
Never mind.
Ring, I don't know. I need to test because people keep asking me, but I'm not sure. I think I was at JST last week. We were putting some gymnastic stuff together, talking through a few programming ideas. We tested a few workouts. We did a 1 minute max rep of ring muscle ups. I did 25, and it felt not too hard. So I think probably like 35, but I don't know.
Wow.
I have to test it. Yeah.
They're pretty knockout stats. I'd have all of those probably on the front of the t-shirt.
I would probably tell everyone about it.
Or at least on a card. This is where you can see I've just done 35 in a minute. Wow. That's incredible. Yeah.
That's some really impressive stats. What was the biggest shock as you entered CrossFit, like physically? Where do you lack the most?
Engine based. So I know that's kind of broad because it's not, engine is kind of a broad spectrum, but yeah, it's that like you don't have that aerobic base from doing gymnastics.
Really?
And that's the thing as well, like let's take the open as an example. Like a workout will come up, it's quite heavy in gymnastics, and everyone messages me like, oh, you're going to like win this event. It's like, come on, let's not be stupid.
Yeah.
It's like, but the problem is, like, unless you have that aerobic base, like the gymnastics doesn't really shine through.
Yeah.
Right, like I'll do okay in those events because the gymnastics is good.
Yeah.
Right, but without that aerobic fitness, it just doesn't. The
it's almost like
shine,
getting a weightlifter and getting them to do. Like I remember when there was all those snatches in the second Open. I think it might have been in 2012 where it started super light and the bars got heavier and heavier.
Like 30 or
something like that. And one of my friends who had like 125 kilo snatch. Like he'd lifted since he was younger, and literally by the second bar he was just gassed.
He's gone.
Just absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
And the first bar was 30 kilos, I think, something like that. It was absolutely nothing. So it is very interesting how and that highlights the differences that you're talking about as well.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing on a competitive level, just kind of going back to that point a bit, that people struggle with or people lack is their kind of like their lactate threshold, but specific to gymnastic skills.
Yes.
If that makes sense, right? So I think it's obviously a complicated topic in itself because effectively your lactate threshold is going to be different depending on the movement.
Yeah.
Right? Because which muscles you're using, how much muscle mass, like whether it's fast twitch or slow twitch dominant, right? But gymnastics in general, they're not that big muscle groups, right? And they're quite isolated, the ones you're using. And because you're using your body weight, you tend to be a bit more fast twitch dominant when you're doing those movements. So that lactate builds up really, really fast.
Super fast,
right?
yeah.
And that's why people hit the wall so fast. It's like people do strict handstand push-ups, all of a sudden they miss a rep, and then they're out for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And people haven't trained properly to kind of like teach their body to like flush and reuse that lactate as fuel effectively.
How do you do that? Because I think that's something that people would be very interested to. I mean, you come and you take a handstand push-up, you do a strict handstand push-up, and you do 10 unbroken, and then literally, you have a rest, and then you do 2. Yeah. So how do you? We understand why, but how do you train that, or how would you develop that, mate?
Yeah. So it's actually kind of going back to the reason I was at JST last week. It's one of the things we were discussing a lot. Doing this specific to gymnastics. So, and we put something together, and basically what we kind of came up with was testing it through a 5-minute max AMRAP. Right. So what we tried to take was you can do it through a max set.
Right.
But the problem is it needs to be specific to CrossFit. Right. And if you take a typical CrossFit workout, your max set isn't going to be enough volume for most people that what you're going to do in the workout. No. Right. So let's take any exercise, any CrossFit workout. The most you're probably going to be doing an exercise for is like 5 minutes at a time. Yeah. Right. In total across the whole workout. Yeah. So we start with a 5-minute test, and then it's kind of 3 phases. So the first phase is like what we call the non-interference phase. Right. So we'll take a percentage of that max set, right, and that will just basically increase each week. So we'll actually keep the volume the same, but the density will change, right? Because the percentage would increase effectively. Right. And we do like non-interference movements, right? So the first phase will be something like, let's say, handstand push-ups, strict handstand push-ups, and then it will be active pace row, like active recovery pace row. Yeah. Right. So just like really, really slow. But just starting to teach your body to learn how to clear that lactate, flush it out, basically. Yeah. So we'll cycle through like that. And then phase 2 is kind of like minimal interference, but still like a little bit of interference there, right? So here we'll start using like isometric holds or like core work as an example. So it's not really, if we take strict handstand push-ups again, doing a hollow hold in between, it's going to interfere a bit more than a recovery pace row, right? But it's not really going to affect the handstand push-ups that much, right? 'Cause it's a different muscle group. And then the last phase, again, like similar process, but you just start using movements that interfere more. Right. So we'll take something easy, right, but something that you can keep moving in the rest. Yeah. And it just starts to clear that lactate without building up more. Right. Right. So as an example, just how super easy it is, for kipping ring muscle ups, we'll do a set, and then we'll just take the rings out of the straps and just hold them like this, and we'll just practice that movement in the rest. Right. So you're still doing the same movement pattern, so your body gets used to flushing the lactate, doing the same movement pattern. Yeah. But it doesn't it's not fatiguing you so much that you can't carry on, basically. Yeah. So that's the cycle that we're working on.
That's super interesting.
It's really interesting. We've tested a lot of it out ourselves and on different athletes. But I'm really kind of confident.
Where did you come up with that? Did you just think of it, or is it something that you learnt through your gymnastics background, or that you've studied, or where do you come up with these ideas?
Yeah, so the idea about lactate threshold specific to gymnastics was Steve. So Steve reached out to me and said, Steve Fawcett, from JST. And he said, look, do you want to come and basically meet up? And I was doing a bit of work with them on their gymnastics anyway. Yeah. And we'll just go through and work something out for a program. Right? He kind of had some ideas and how it would work, and then we just went through all the movements and put something together. Wow. I don't claim to be an expert in physiology or anything like that. For sure. And I don't claim to be right, but just through research that we've done ourselves and testing. And exactly. Right. So just from what's worked from athletes ourselves and the research that we've done.
I think that's sort of the best way, because in CrossFit today,
Yeah, no one really knows.
Nobody
right?
knows.
They can say they do, but they.
So
yeah.
it's just about
Marcus Philly
experience.
comes up with this functional bodybuilding, and everyone wants to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it going to benefit you? Well, yeah, of course it is, because it's program and it's discipline, and they're good movements, and they're helping you in different planes of motion than we're using in CrossFit. So everyone thinks, oh, I do this for 3 months and I get way better at CrossFit, and you would do.
Yeah. I guess the only thing you can do is just, stay open-minded and, just keep researching and keep, your head in the game and see what happens. And, like you said, instead of testing a max set and then retesting 1 month again, let's see how many you can do 5 minutes. Because if you look at 1,000 CrossFit workouts with toaster bars, you're approximately going to be working for that 3 or 5 minute gap that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of reiterate to what we were speaking about earlier as well, this is kind of the final stage of that progression. Yeah, whatever you.
The third one. That's the third pillar.
And it's the third pillar. But when we talk about building that foundation, doing that foundational stuff like the strength, getting the skill right, and building it in gradually, this is kind of the end point. Right. So if you're periodizing it, this is the last point. Or if you're developing an athlete from the beginning, getting their first muscle up all the way to the end, that's the last point. Right. People that don't have good technique with their gymnastics, can't do a reasonable number unbroken, then they don't really have any business doing that end of the spectrum.
5 minute max,
so that's kind of
push-ups.
more at the competitive level.
So, mate, talk to us a little bit about Jack Gymnastics. When did it start? What does it do? Where do people find you?
Do you actually get jacked from doing it?
It's a pretty big statement. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I know. I think this is also. Yeah, so people call me Jack, and everybody thinks that I call it Jack Gymnastics because they think that I'm jacked. And I don't at all. I'm not. But
your name is not Jack, and you're not jacked.
No, unfortunately.
False. Good at gymnastics.
False marketing.
I think the idea of the name really initiated because it's kind of basically like CrossFit. So a lot like the athletes that we're working with, a lot of the programming and seminars that we're doing are geared towards CrossFit gymnastics.
Right.
Yeah. And the good thing about CrossFit is, if you take a gymnast, just a pure gymnast on their own, they're, despite what you might think, because they're all standing next to each other on TV, so they look the same size, they're pretty fucking tiny.
Are they?
They're generally pretty small. And that's kind of the thing that got me about CrossFit and why I started liking it, is it's pretty skinny and kind of pale. And
just like Trey. Reset.
We'll cut this off.
No, we won't.
So that's kind of why I like the idea of CrossFit, because it's not only doing the gymnastics elements, but you've got guys that are or girls that are a lot bigger and weigh a lot more than typical gymnasts. Right, you have to do all these other things. You need to be lower body strength and all these different things. Yeah. Just the combination of those things, right? Which is why I kind of came up with the name Jack Gymnastics, because it's generally more jacked people doing gymnastics.
Yeah. Very cool.
In terms of when it started, about 14, 15 months ago.
Right.
So I actually had no kind of interest or anything in doing it when I first started CrossFit.
Yeah.
And then after about a year into CrossFit, people just kind of started asking me for help, and kind of, said I should probably start doing these seminars and programming and stuff like this.
Yeah.
I was working full time in something different. I kind of wasn't enjoying it. I wanted to get out of that anyway. So I just kind of went with it, to be honest. I just started. Things just happened pretty quickly, in all honesty. I made an Instagram account, started posting some drills and some technique tips and stuff like that. Yeah. Which grew quite quickly, and then before I knew it, I was starting to do seminars.
But you're just an independent brand. You do programs for people. You do seminars. You're not a gym as such, so people can't come to the Jack Gymnastics gym, but they can get all different services or come and see you in a seminar setting.
Yeah.
And what different services do you have?
Yeah, so we so on the website we've got a few different programs. We have a Open Peak program.
Yep.
Right, which is athletes that want to peak towards the Open. We have a year-round program, which is for those that want to do multiple competitions throughout the year. Right, and they're not fundamentally that different from each other, right? It's still gymnastics, right? But it's just what we were talking about earlier, just periodizing it a bit more towards the Open.
Yeah.
Right. We have a gymnastics strength and conditioning program, which is just basically pure gymnastics, so strict movements and progressions towards some more advanced skills, like presses to handstand, stuff like that. And then we have a scale program, right, which there's some prerequisites on the website for people that's relevant to, but people that don't really have all the skills yet in CrossFit and want to learn them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should really ask a couple of questions on the show notes because I know you spend a lot of time on these, mate. And we're 35 minutes in, and we're we've done the intro, but mate, one that I wanted to pick out on that I think is quite interesting. What are the 3 exercises that you think people should do more of, and how should they implement it? I think this is one of the biggest things because we kind of do want to get better with shortcuts.
Yeah,
I know there is no shortcut, but I think a lot of people just need if you want to get better at gymnastics. We know that you should have a program and we know you should be patient and stuff, but life's not really like that. I also want to get better at rowing, running, weightlifting, all of that. So what would be 3 exercises that you think people could implement that would just really help their gymnastics work?
Yeah, I think so. The first one, from like a foundational perspective, right? So again, so people aren't getting injured all the time.
Yeah.
And just like a simple thing to do, it builds like really good shoulder endurance. It's something that came up with called Gymnastics Swimming.
Yep.
So I don't really know how to explain this, but
is that where Hesketh stole it from?
Yep.
Did he? Where is he?
Oh man, you should have seen it when the first time we put it in class. I actually didn't realise it came from you. Really?
Yeah.
I
so
think
it's
he
like
credited you at the start.
It doesn't take long, right? And it's just really good for like shoulder endurance, shoulder health. Right? We're talking about everyone having their shoulders protracted. Just pulls your shoulders back and you start moving in that position. That's something I'd definitely recommend people do.
Where did you...
you get on your chest.
Yeah, it's hard to explain.
Feet on the floor. And then you do whatever. You do breast swimming, freestyle.
Yeah, so the sequence is... I mean, there's different things you can do and you can change out. But the sequence what I usually do is... I get people to put their head down on the floor.
Yeah.
Right, so you can do it in an arch position. But the reason I get people to put their head down on the floor is just because it just isolates the shoulders. Gives them less to think about.
Probably doesn't make their neck crook as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like the first part is you just hold, right? So I don't know how to explain this. You kind of got like a right angle at your elbow.
Yeah.
Imagine you're laying front and prone, and you're gonna retract your shoulders back to lift your elbow and your hands off the floor.
Yep.
You're gonna hold that position for 30 seconds. You can go 20 reps front crawl, so just like you would swim normally, keeping your hands off the ground. 20 reps breaststroke, again just how you'd swim. And the last one, just like moving up and down. So you just pull further into retraction, lower down a bit, and so on.
It's if you are listening and you haven't tried it, I suggest you just try those simple movements. Like
no warm up needed.
No warm up. Just jump into it, and you actually. You'll probably yearn a little bit for some water because actually when you bring those hands over and try and pull back around the first time, I was like, the floor's not supposed to be quite as close as that. But mate, but how did you think of that? Is it something that you'd used before, or?
I mean, I've done like similar variations of things like LYTPs.
Right.
And people, I don't know how to explain that either. You kind of lay on your front, you move your arms up and down different directions. Just for like basically scapular health and stability, so to speak. So I've done different things like that, and I wanted to come up with something that. Like one is a bit fun. Yeah. So people like it kind of catches on. People enjoy doing it. It's easy to do. They can do it as a warm up.
Yeah.
And it just like brings in a few more elements, right? Like a bit more shoulder endurance because you're potentially there holding it for a long time.
Yeah.
There's like a bit of mental toughness as well.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it's a burn.
Yeah. Because you can push your limits.
You can push harder than you think. Right? Like someone will do it once. They'll do like a round unbroken. They'll do it again next week, and they'll do like 2 or 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Right. So you can push hard. And I kind of I like that.
What's the record?
So. The record is actually Julie Abelgard, who I think she did, I'm trying to remember now, she did 5 rounds unbroken.
Wow.
And she was holding, I can't remember the weight of the plates, I mean it's obviously super light, but she was holding fractional plates in her hands. Yeah.
So 5 rounds.
Yeah, but mate, you've seen the size of her shoulders.
Yeah, it's just
30-second hold, and then 20
yeah, so 20 in total, so 10 on each arm, 20 breaststroke, 20 reps up and down. Yeah.
That's decent.
So one round would at least take
and I don't think I could do that.
90 seconds.
Yeah, maybe like 80 to 90 seconds. Yeah.
That's like 6
I mean,
minutes.
it obviously depends on the like you can cheat the range of motion a bit and go faster, right? But it's such one of those things.
Yeah. That's the first thing that everyone should do. So, what else do you recommend there?
The second thing, to be honest, maybe not a specific movement, but just spend more time like on the equipment. Right? If we take the rings as an example,
right,
if you take ring muscle ups, everybody's trying to do a ring muscle up, but all these people can't do a ring swing properly. Right, and that's the basics. That's the starting point of a muscle up where you develop the power in the kip.
Yeah.
Right, so just like spend time like learning to swing properly on the rings. Yeah. And it's just one of those things that the more time you spend on the apparatus, the more comfortable and confident you become.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing those movements.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a big one, like the ring swing.
Yeah.
Because it also hands over to other stuff. Just the awareness of like the hollow and arch positions and how to use your body.
And actually just lets your shoulders hang out a
Yeah.
bit as well.
Yeah, sure.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, I've seen some people try and jump up on the rings. You know exactly.
There's multiple benefits.
Yeah, 100%. And it hands over
Absolutely.
to lots of other
Yeah.
movements, right? Which is important because, like you were saying, Marcus, it's in CrossFit there's like hundreds of other things you need to do
Yeah.
and work on, right?
Yeah.
So you don't always have the time in the day to.
Like
do
you
everything
can
and you
still
can't,
talk
right?
to someone about what they did at the weekend whilst just swinging from a set of
Yeah.
rings.
Yeah.
Like casually for 30 seconds, for example.
You can be swinging next to each other.
Yeah.
You could do. That'd be cute. Third one to round it out, mate. What else would you say?
The third one, I would say, kind of dynamic core drills.
Yeah.
Right. So I think everybody can, like, get on the floor and find and hold an arch position or hollow position.
Right.
Right. That's not the problem, but it's when you add in a dynamic element, so you start moving basically.
Yeah.
That it all goes to pot. Right. Like people lose their positions.
Yeah.
They just don't have that awareness of finding that position. Right. So if you, I can think loads of times I've recorded someone doing, let's say, a ring swing.
Yeah.
And then I've like shown the video back, and they're like kind of gobsmacked at their position. Right, they had no
Really?
idea. They thought they were in a great position. Right, but
Yeah.
it's just that awareness.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is just core drills, right? So like hollow and arch positions, but just try and make it more dynamic. Right, like do like rocks, hollow rocks, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a good thing we do usually at the beginning of the seminar, where I get them to say hold a hollow position, and I'll basically just lift their feet up. So I'm lifting them off the floor. They start to roll onto their shoulders like a shoulder stand.
Yeah.
But they have to keep that hollow position. Right, so they learn to feel what they need to do to keep that position without breaking at the hip, without
Yeah.
losing their core and
Yeah.
those kind of things.
Awesome. Mate, that's super. I'll do one of three. All three of them. You reckon?
Everyone should be doing it. It's super
Yeah,
easy.
It's super
and,
easy, though. Like,
And those three things you can incorporate effectively as a warm-up if you wanted
Yeah.
to, right? It doesn't need
Yeah.
to take more time, right?
Yeah.
It's-
no matter how good you are, you can always do more of that.
Yeah.
Like,
and also even like, okay, if you don't have rings at home or you don't have something to hang from at home, just skip that one out. But the other two things
Yeah.
you could basically do at home. You can do anywhere. You can do it in a hotel room. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things if people are traveling. We get a lot of people traveling
Yeah.
and, you know, what can I do when I'm on the road? And it's like, well, why don't you just do this? And it won't take too long.
Yeah.
And it's nice and straightforward.
Yeah.
Very good. Have we hit pretty much everything in there, Dr. Dre?
there's a few things missing, but we continue for hours about this. But
Yeah, that's true.
how do people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we have a website, which is just jackgymnastics.com.
Yeah.
We have an Instagram account, which is where we do most of our social media.
Yeah.
I mean, people on the website, people can sign up to the email subscriber list, and they get newsletters and access to some of the posts before they come out.
Okay.
And then, yeah, mainly Instagram, right? So just Jack Gymnastics, no spaces, underscores, anything
bang.
like that. Right?
Easy.
Jack and his
yeah.
gymnastics.
Yeah.
Mate, that's super cool. I think maybe get you back on in a few months and hear how that stuff, very interested to hear how the geeky stuff's going with
Yeah,
Steve.
that'd be
And
great.
a little bit more, I mean, it's a nice overview there and some real specifics, but I think a lot of people would learn a lot from another show. So,
Yeah, definitely. Thank
very
you.
good.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Oh, thank
Easy
you for having
peasy.
me.
Cheers.
Perfect.
Thanks a lot for tuning into this episode of the podcast, folks, and a massive thanks to Matt. Useful insights. Make sure you hop over to his website, Instagram. Check him out, Jacked Gymnastics, and follow his progress. If you're into the geeky stuff, that is certainly something for you. He really knows exactly what's going on, and they're playing with some good things to develop gymnastics that I'm sure you can take advantage of. Don't forget to hop over to iTunes, rate and review the podcast. We'll send you a goodie bag from Smith Street Paleo. If you've got any questions, winning@InnerFight.com. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.